In this step, I'll give you a quick rundown of Pico's folder structure so you know where you can start digging in to modify code, debug, or make changes. So at the top level, you have the Electron app, and this is the graphical app that is displayed on Pico. You have a Python folder that contains a script that runs in the background that controls Pico's camera, and the Electron app and the Python app communicate with each other. So the Electron app can tell when the camera should be turned off, on, off, or etc. You have the scripts folder, which contains the launch script that is run when Pico is booted up, and you'll see that it first runs the Python script in the background and then launches the Electron application. And then you have a servo simulator folder, which is a processing sketch that you would run on your development machine to visually create servo movements or animations for Pico. And I'll create a separate tutorial on how to do that. So digging into the main application, which is the Electron application, the application is launched from this main.js file, and it includes, or rather it displays, the index.html file. So the index.html file is just an HTML file which shows, which is basically how Pico's face should look, and it is styled with this CSS file. At the end of this index.html file, you'll see it includes this global.js file, which adds in all the interactivity to Pico. So this is the main JavaScript file that adds in the main interactivity. Before showing you what this file does, at this top level, you'll see there are 4 folders. The config folder contains all configuration files, so it will contain files that you've created in other services such as your Dialogflow API key, your Pico wake word detector, and it'll also contain any external API keys. So you would add in your API keys at different points in this file, and as you would integrate it with other external services, you would add in those API keys in this file. You have your CSS folder, and then you have your media folder. The media folder contains, as the name says, any media that will be displayed on Pico. So you have your images, which in this case is just Pico's glasses right now. You have your responses, which is your local database of responses that you want Pico to use for a specific response type. So for example, if Pico is supposed to look confused, you create a folder called confused, and within it include any files that you want him to use. So these are the supported file types. You can use a JPEG, a PNG, a GIF, an MP4, or a WebP file. You have a servo animations folder, and these are the JSON files that are created using that processing sketch that I spoke about earlier. And these files are essentially large arrays that contain the microsecond values that will be sent to each of those servos at 30 frames per second. And since there are 3 servos, there are 3 values, 1 for each servo. And then you have a sounds file, which contains sounds that you want Pico to play at different parts of the response. So when you say the word Pico, this alert sound file is played back. So digging into the JavaScript folder, this is the global.js file, and it's the main file that adds in the interactivity and includes all these other JavaScript files and initializes them. So the way this works is that, as an example, if you see, it includes this buttons file. So the way to track down this buttons file is you look inside the JS folder, which we are in, then inside the senses folder, and then you'll find a file called buttons.js, which you'll see is inside the senses, and then buttons.js. Moving down, you'll see there's this the buttons get initialized over here. So if you were to track down this initialize buttons function, the way to do it would be first to see how this file has been included, which you find as a file path, and then find that function inside that file. So if I was to open buttons.js, you'll see that it includes the initialize buttons function. The main files that you would probably be modifying to add in new skills is the events folder. There's a listeners function, so everything in Pico is event based. A function emits an event, and then another function listening to that event knows what to do when it receives a particular event. You have your skills, which are external skills, or just any skills that you have developed that you want Pico. So in this case, you have the weather skill, which is the ability to get the weather from openweather.api and then display it. And then finally, you have your intents, which are intents that it receives from the online speech to text engine, and then depending on the type of intent you receive, you can set a particular action. So when, for example, you receive the weather intent, then it will go and get the weather from that Open Weather API. So I'll create another tutorial explaining the entire steps, or all the steps from the time that you give a voice command to the time that you receive a response. So that will be coming up next in a subsequent tutorial.